Here's a far-fetched plan, but I'm just trying to think of something.
All right.
So like chickens, you build a chicken coop.
Yep.
And they're, pretty safe because they can lay their eggs up in those things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could design some kind of a structure or provide does some kind of infrastructure?
You're on drugs.
To have their fawns in a way that they were protected with some kind of human element?
Well, I mean, I was gonna.
There actually is science on this.
Yeah, see,
believe it or not.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, it's almost food plot season, Jared, and Deer Grow is one of those products that has really changed the way that we plant food plots and the success we've seen from them.
No doubt. I've been, trying to plant food plots my entire whitetail hunting career, which is a little shorter than yours, but the minute that I started, or that I realized that I could get Deer Grow back into some of these remote plots where I couldn't get lime or fertilizer, especially in the 50-pound bag, format. Mm-hmm. So everything was changed. I could get into these spots moving forward with a backpack sprayer, and that's since escalated to these 40 or 60 gallon sprayers, and we're doing upwards of 5 to 10 acre food plots just with Deer Grow and having phenomenal success.
Yeah, and I mean, with the price of fertilizer, lime, diesel, everything this year, I mean, what better way to get in there and grow a successful food plot at about a third of the cost? Check out Deer Grow at deergrow.com. And we're back.
Hey,
HUNTR Podcast, episode 75. I remember that from last time.
Collect ourselves here.
Yeah, dude, it's a freaking whirlwind. It's the 19th of May. I said it's almost June. We're only halfway through this
You've
month.
got some food plots going in though, right?
I do. So
that's more than I can say.
I
don't even have mineral out.
I got clover growing in the new food plot in Pennsylvania. I sprayed, probably about two acres in Kentucky that I'm going to probably put beans.
That's that field on the neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good spot.
I know.
You're going to put a blind down there, right?
Mm-hmm. I've got a ground blind down there, but I'm going to probably put a elevated box blind there.
Yeah. So
I sprayed that. Hopefully it kills. Dude, it shot up in 2 weeks because I was like, oh, it's not too bad. And I got down there and I'm like, this is tall.
It's funny how that stuff gets away from you, man.
Yeah. So I sprayed pretty heavily. I nuked it. So hopefully in 2 weeks it's good. And then I'll work that soil. And then I've got to get to Ohio and spray, which I've been playing phone tag with the neighbor who wants to hay it. And I'm like, yeah, do it. But now, I'm like, don't wait. Because I'm going to nuke it here soon.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't hear back. So, yeah, I'm getting there. Trying to stick to my original goal, which was and obviously if I don't get summer plots in, it's not a big deal, but I'd like to, in some of these places, get summer plots in. And even if they get crushed, at least I have a little bit easier time working in July and August for brassicas.
Yeah. Dude, even if you put those
grass.
beans in late, they'll just be green later.
Yep. Yeah, they'll grow. So we'll see. That's the plan. So I've got to kind of.
Dude, I'm super excited about. I mean, it's the longer I hold off or deprive myself of deer-related activities, the better they are. When I get to finally do it.
Yeah, and I feel pretty good about it. Now it's crunch time. Now it's
no, it's not crunch time.
Well,
maybe for summer projects.
Planning. Yeah, for summer projects. So because here's the thing, I already bought $1,000 in real war beans. So I got to plant them.
You're still fine. Yeah, I mean, if you get those in by the end of June, you'll be okay.
Yep, that's the plan. So I'm gonna try to spray here in the next week or two and have everything done right around that Memorial Day, first week of June, from a summer standpoint, and then vegetate for 2 months to figure out what I'm gonna do for the fall.
Yeah, so that's why I'm kind of banking everything on these fall plots. I'm just gonna go hard in the paint on brassicas.
Yeah, I think it'll be.
I did 10 acres brassicas, just 10 acres brassicas across all the stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the way to do it. Put some oats in there and.
Well, dude, my strategy is just completely flipped with all this new property that I have to hunt right there around the farm. Mm-hmm. There's just no way for me to I haven't had time to develop a plan. Sure. As far as planting all that and stuff. But I know where the good spots are. Yeah. And I as of now, I think the plan is I'll get mineral out, hopefully by the end of June.
Yep.
And I'll throw some cameras up over them just for fun. And then not necessarily tied to any hunting locations, just property.
Just there.
On the property.
Yep.
I'll carve out some significant fall plots. I'll do some heavy brassicas or, oats or winter wheat.
Yeah.
And,
just let it go.
Yeah, dude, I'm not gonna, I've been totally tore up with like the whole season on that farm for a long time. And like, I think as I'm getting older, I've just got more years on that farm.
Mm-hmm.
I just know when there's times that are worth expending effort, and there's times that kind of aren't. And it's basically early and rut.
Yeah.
And in some cases, late season.
Yeah. And in Ohio, I don't know. I'm just going to try to get food on it and see what happens. Kentucky, I'd like to try to punch a tag during that opening weekend in velvet.
Be sick.
Yeah. And you
can bait in Kentucky, right?
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
I've got bucks hanging around. So if I can get those beans established and have green beans.
Okay. So
and I guess the kids will probably shoot it, not me, but still one of us will punch a tag. Yeah.
So the trick with killing a mature buck over bait is just it's like a bait site.
Sure.
Like literally it comes down to, can this location be approached and hunted knowing that buck is going to circle downwind?
Well, and I think,
it's just like rattling. Like, can you find it? Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily, it's harder than people think. Those who've never done it think it's super easy. It's not. I do think that
it's the right setup.
You've got the best chance in either early or late season. Once you get into like that October, November period, it's really tough because there's so many other food sources, and this buck doesn't want to be around this buck, and but in the early or late season, like I've seen multiple mature bucks just sitting and hammering a corn pop.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that is. And I did a lot of cutting in Pennsylvania, which I'll migrate that probably to the other two farms next year. But I'll be interested with just how much cutting I did, if that makes a difference in terms of some of the deer that I start to see show up, plus the addition of another acre of food on that property. That clover's coming up really good. So I did Balanza and Berseem, which we talked about with Dr. Strickland a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks really good.
Nice.
And I mean, that's a place that, it was a standing chunk of timber, 2 months ago, and, just went in and seeded it and deer growed it, and boom, exploded.
Very cool.
So I may not mess with that too much. I thought about killing that all off and putting brassica in there. I might end up just working like half of that and leave the rest. If it grows into like really good clover, just leave it just for the first year.
Sure.
So we'll see. That said, obviously one of the big things that I think we're both proponents of is continuing to work on the habitat aspect of it, not just the food plot side. And so today's guest is Dr. Marcus Lashley, right now he's from University of Florida Deer Lab, down in Gainesville. I know Marcus from both my alma mater of Mississippi State University, and then before that at UT Knoxville under the only Dr. Craig Harper. We love Marcus. So it'll be good to get Marcus on. He's got some really cool projects that he's working on. And I'm interested to pick his brain a little bit around these bow stand burns. So he's the guy who kind of coined that term and really worked on these like concentrated burns around your stand, and saw some pretty good results. So
awesome.
Want to bring in Marcus? The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt Archery.
Dude, where would we be without our Hoyt bows?
Probably shooting crossbows.
or a Matthews. Yeah.
One and the same.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we love being Hoyt guys because you stand out. When you're in this room full of other people that shoot these other types of bows, I feel like the Hoyt guys just stick out.
Dude, it's just a legit bow. I mean, especially that carbon riser, man. I mean, I know that they've got several other aluminum lines as well, but for me, I'm shooting that RX5 in the carbon model. They've since come out with the RX7, and I can't tell you how much I love being a Hoyt guy amongst a sea full of Matthews guys. So we're out there, I think, proving them wrong, shooting 80 pounds and, killing stuff.
Hey, man, if you want to get serious, get Hoyt. All right, and now, cue in Dr. Marcus Lashley. Hey, man.
Hey, what's going on?
We appreciate you coming on this morning. Marcus, one of the things that Jared and I, we were just kind of opening up the podcast and talking about it. And we're talking about food plots and kind of some of the habitat work. And man, it seems like no matter how we plan it, it always just creeps up on us. And it's like, yeah, there's like I'm running out of time already to do stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
So I guess, Marcus, just to kind of start off, maybe give the listeners a little background on you in terms of kind of the universities and university work that you've been working on, and then, you know, where you're at now with the UF Deer Lab.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to do that. So I was born and raised in West Alabama in a really small town, and had a bunch of, you know, family that were all hunting and fishing. And that's what got me passionate about the outdoors, and it kind of led me into working in this field. And it's also influencing the work that I do, because when I'm thinking about science, I'm thinking about science from the standpoint of how do we make more game and improve hunting experience, you know, that sort of stuff. So it's really driving the way that I do things. But I went to Mississippi State and got a bachelor's there, and then I went to the University of Tennessee and worked on my master's with one of your former guests, Craig Harper.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a transformative experience for me, for sure, for a variety of reasons.
Because of Craig or the university?
Because of Craig specifically. I think the university atmosphere is probably pretty similar to most big SEC schools. But working with him was a real eye opener and really interesting in a lot of ways, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I learned a ton. And so I worked on a project where we were looking at different timber harvesting practices with and without fire and herbicides, and how that affected deer habitat and turkeys. So I also did a fair amount with oak masting during that time. We started a project. We actually just published it. It was like 8 generations or something of Craig Harper lab students that we kept it going. So we had this 10-year experiment on white oak masting. It was pretty awesome that we published all together. But so then I moved on, and I had a state agency job in Florida for a year, and basically I was lighting stuff on fire every day, all day, managing habitat. So really fell in love with, you know, using fire, especially in the piney woods over in the Southeast. And that led me into the PhD program at NC State, where I worked on fire ecology as it affected predator-prey interactions between deer and coyotes. And that was really an awesome experience. And after I did that, I ended up landing a faculty job back at Mississippi State. And I was there. That's probably when people, if they've followed me online or anything, that's when I kind of popped up online. The social media scene wasn't really a scene back in the days when I was in graduate school, which seems crazy to me because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But I wish I had started then, because some of the things that I was doing, would have really taken off and been informative to people, but that wasn't the way things were back then. But so worked at Mississippi State. I was the habitat specialist, and I was working with a bunch of the guys in the MSU Deer Lab, and kind of filling the role as the habitat guy, and did that for 4 years. And then this opportunity at the University of Florida came open, and I really thought it was a great opportunity because there were no faculty or really people doing research in the state on game species, particularly deer and turkey. There is a fair amount of quail work, but not much on those other species. And that I saw that as an opportunity, especially as someone who's really keen on fire ecology and interested in that. This is the fire capital of the world, so it kind of, they wanted me to come here to build the same kind of program that I was involved in at Mississippi State with MSU Deer Lab. So that's why I created the UF Deer Lab. And it's a little more diverse probably than MSU Deer Lab, because we focus on a variety of species. It's really more about habitat management and how that affects survival and reproduction of game. But do plenty of deer work as part of that.
Yeah. And I think that the kind of the interesting thing there, Marcus, is like for, us guys who are in the Northeast or Midwest, you know, a lot of us don't think of Florida as being a deer state. Like, I think we probably all kind of think of it a little bit in the turkey sense, especially when we think Osceolas and stuff.
Turkeys
you know,
and gators, what I think.
yeah, but you don't think of it as a deer hunting state, or, you know, a very, you know, prevalent deer population in the state. And, you know, there definitely is, especially as you're in, you know, through the panhandle and stuff. And then, you know, as you get further south, then obviously eventually you hit, you know, key deer area.
Well, yeah, I had that same perception even until I moved here. You know, there weren't that many. You know, I don't hear about anybody making it a destination place to go deer hunt.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a few reasons for that. We don't tend to support populations of really large antler deer that people are seeking to go, you know, when they go to these other places. But there are some places, especially in North Florida, that consistently support some pretty big deer. I have seen quite a few of them. I haven't harvested one myself, but I've seen several that will make you think, wow, I can't believe that was in Florida.
Yeah.
So folks can find those, you know, there's examples online. I see them on social media commonly, and people can find those if you're interested in seeing some of those big deer. But, you know, there are some, and particularly in the river drainages up in the panhandle, you'll see them pretty consistently. But one of the things that, to me as a scientist, it just blew me away is the opportunity ecologically to understand why deer do things. It is as ripe as it gets in this place.
Yeah.
This is one of the wildest transitions in deer population and behavior and ecology that you can get in the state.
Yeah.
And the one that really shocks people, if you haven't heard about it or seen it, the breeding seasons.
Yep.
We have deer breeding in almost every month somewhere in the state. And, you know, like literally in South Florida, they're hunting the rut in like August. You know, it's just completely wild. One of the conception studies where they were tracking when the fawns were conceived showed that fawns were being conceived somewhere in 10 out of 12 months.
Wow.
You know, that was when it was peaking. So to me, I see that as some, you know, well, I grew up hunting and fishing, and I just love game because of that.
Yep.
But also, you know, I'm one of those people that gets on the tractor and I want to know how to work the tractor, crank it and everything, but I really don't need to know how the engine works. But if we go to the wildlife scene, I want to know how everything's working, you know, the little details under the hood.
Yep.
And to me, being in a place like this, where we have this wild variation in a behavior or trait like that's pretty exciting to me. Even though the deer tend to be on the smaller side, I'm good with that. I'd rather have the real diversity and ecology of the species.
So, Marcus, are you guys looking at that in Florida as kind of what we did in Mississippi, more looking at, like, was there, you know, long-lasting, multi-generational genetic impacts, or because Florida is obviously a, you know, long latitudinal state, you know, and the diverse variety in the, let's say, landscape ecology, right, in terms of, you know, swamps and, you know, then you've got, you know, pine areas.
Retirement communities.
Yeah, retirement communities, yeah. Yeah.
It's plenty of those.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so what are you guys looking at there from seeing this just giant variation in breeding dates from north to south?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know how much genetic work has been done on that. That's not, you know, that I'm very interested in that, but I don't have that skill set personally. Sure. Some of the things that are really fascinating about it to me, and that I'm really interested in looking at it, is if you look at ungulates just in general, and I'm just talking about different deer species and, you know, all over the world, it's pretty clear. There's a clear pattern that the timing of reproduction is based on having young during a peak in resource availability.
Right.
we demonstrated this pretty well actually with whitetails across their range. It was actually one of your old lab mates, Eric Mitchell, led the study, and we put together deer studies all over the eastern U.S. all the way up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, all the way around down through the South, and looked at this, and it was pretty telling that the resource impact. Now, obviously, when we were doing restocking efforts and moving deer around in different places, it sort of muddies the water up a little bit to see those patterns, but it's clear when you start looking at all the deer species everywhere. And one of the things that I was really interested in Florida related to that is this basically is all southern coastal plain poor, just if there aren't any other land management activities supplementing the nutrition, it's pretty poor for a deer.
Sure.
Across the state. So any resource pulse during the summer should be particularly important to this deer population and when they breed and all that. And I guess the wildest part of that is if you go down to South Florida, those fawns are being born when the water is shallow enough that they won't drown, essentially.
Right.
So it's that phenologically that the resource is dry ground for them.
Yep.
It doesn't matter how much food's available if you drown.
Sure.
But if you start tracking through the rest of the state, it's pretty interesting because you start to see changes in the pattern of breeding, and it doesn't really make sense with day length that well. So it's not like it's
like
something associated with green up.
Yeah.
But what is very telling is the places where lightning intensity is extremely dense. So in other words, fire from nature would have been really important.
Yeah.
Those populations cluster in a certain time period that's different than the places where lightning would have probably generated less fire. And that has been really interesting because I've worked a lot on the timing of fire and how that affects deer nutrition, and particularly pulses of resources of being available for a lactating doe to support fawns.
Yeah.
And for me, that gets pretty exciting because when you look at it at the broader scale, it actually matches what we should expect based on when lightning would have generated most fire and how it affects the nutrient pulse in the vegetation, which should have been particularly important for deer.
So Marcus, on that side, in terms of let's say, whatever, July, August, if there were lightning strikes causing fire at that time and a burn would happen, there's really not necessarily a wet season to follow to then kind of regenerate lush, good, forage and habitat. Whereas if you had it more in the, early spring, there's still usually a lot of time that's going to produce better forage and essentially the, habitat for those deer to thrive in.
Well, that certainly could be true in some areas. In Florida, it was actually when I originally came here, it was kind of shocking to me because starting about mid-June, it rains every day at 2 o'clock. And it rains on through, late summer.
Wow.
And I'm serious. It's like every single day in the afternoon. And it doesn't rain that much, but there's some rain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, interestingly, a lot of the plants in the communities here will burn when it's raining. It doesn't matter. Wiregrass, I have literally watched it burn while it was raining.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting, how pyrophytic all these plants, they really love and promote fire in a lot of these systems. So, and a lot of the resource pulse that's coming after fire, that generally is about a 4 to 8 week period after fire. And the drought certainly, droughty conditions would certainly suppress that. But a lot of those plants have this root system where they've been top killed, and they're getting energy from that root system to put back into the resprouting. So they're still a pulse. And actually, if you look at the general community of plants, that drought really will damper the average forage quality of plants just available. And then that makes the fire effect even more important. You know, it may be slightly suppressed by drought, but it's a wider pulse, I guess. You know, it's a much bigger pulse relative to what's naturally available, because, you know, during the droughty conditions, you don't get the full response that you get in most years when you have a lot of rain.
And are you seeing any of that kind of response as you move south, like towards the Everglades and stuff? Because like in my mindset, you know, I always think of, you know, things around the Everglades as being like that rainforest jungle, essentially. You know, it seems like it's always moist in that area. You know, are you seeing fire or effects of fire being down there having a play on the deer?
I haven't studied it there, you know, to put the eye on it, to put the numbers on it.
Sure.
But fire is an absolute critical process in that system, and because of that, there's no way it's not a strong influence on deer. Especially because of the way the plant communities and resprouting plants respond. That, you know, it's basically not a possibility that it's not critical, because they eat plants, and the plant quality and composition and availability is being regulated by fire.
And you, I guess, Marcus, you being a fire guy, you know, how does a state like Florida, and I guess I look at the state more from like the public standpoint, you know, how is that being tolerated down there? Because like I know back where we're at here in Pennsylvania or Ohio, like there's definitely prescribed burns happening, but you know, fire is bad. That is the mindset of the majority of people up here, and it's because, you know, they're hung on the news seeing what's happening in California or New Mexico or Colorado or wherever.
It's a legitimate concern. I mean, we got a lot of metropolitan areas and just homes, you know, and fires get away from people. I think everybody knows somebody that's. I had a neighbor growing up that died. He had a small fire in his backyard, and the fumes just consumed him, killed him. You know, I think a lot of people know people like that, or they have some kind of story where they're like, fires. We don't do fire. My dad and I had a fire kind of almost get away from us, and it was scared him enough to where he's like, we don't burn.
Yeah, and I mean that becomes the mindset, I think, of a lot of the public, where obviously I think we all know that if we could apply it in the correct mindset and correct, you know, time frame, like it's super effective to all of the habitat that work that you know the majority of us listening to this want to do.
And in most cases, if we were applying it at the landscape scale, like it would have been occurring in the system before we were tampering around with it, a lot of the stuff you're seeing on the media wouldn't be there.
Right.
Because, you know, one of the values of using prescribed fire is that we can remove a lot of the dead biomass, and then that catastrophic wildfire is not, you know, it's just not going to happen.
So when
you go out west, that things change a little bit. The system's different, and the way that the fuel accumulates and stuff is different. But like in the South, you don't have that much wildfire, in part because we use fire so much.
Yeah, you burn that fuel load down.
And the other misconception about that is that, you know, especially when you have sensitive areas like, you know, communities or whatever, it's really the smoke.
Sure.
You know, the smoke is guaranteed to always leave the site.
Yeah.
So that's what can really cause some big issues. And we've had some instances here where there were fires, and then prescribed fire, and then the weather changed or something, and it caused the smoke not to get up and dissipate into the atmosphere, and it kind of set down on a major road or something. And you know, that's a huge problem. And obviously no one's trying to do that, and it has happened. But, you know, we also set, I don't even know how many thousands and thousands and thousands of fires in the state of Florida on purpose every year. And you know, that is a very rare event that happens. Obviously, even once is a big problem. But another thing that's really interesting is because of the cultural differences and the different situations in different parts of the U.S. and different acceptance levels of it. We have, in many of the southern states, right to burn laws, where it's deemed a, you know, for the common good of the people. And there are, we have legislation in place that help protect people from the liabilities associated, because it's inherently dangerous, but we also know that it's a critical process in our systems that we have to have.
Yeah. That's a big thing that, I don't think we have up this way, or not that I know of, at least.
I know there's burn bans.
Yeah, there's plenty of burn bans that happen.
But even if you want to,
we do that here too. When it gets too dry and things are too volatile, that's common to have burn bans here as well.
Yeah, I think ours are, typically May, June, July, August, September.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was going to be my question, Marcus, is like, people listening to this, or, if they've got property, we've all thought about it, whether we've watched, something from you guys or Strickland at Mississippi State Deer Lab, or, Jeff Sturgis, or Grant and Growing Deer. Like, we see burns being used and we're all curious about it. I guess ultimately, like, when's the right time to burn?
Well, that's a loaded question. Well, so one thing, I guess that kind of speaks to your last question, especially in Florida, but in the South, there's a pretty high acceptance of fire. It's just been a part of everybody's life that's from here for their whole life. So really, the acceptance, especially in Florida, is extremely high from Florida natives. The people that don't accept it generally are transplants from somewhere else where fire was bad. So that's definitely playing a role in the whole situation, even to the extent that it's affecting legislation that would promote or suppress the use of fire. But when most people use fire is during what the late dormant season or early growing season, depending on where you're at.
Gotcha.
And there's a lot of reasons why that is the case. It's more fun. That's one thing. You don't want to carry a drip torch around when it's 102 degrees outside.
Yeah, that's true.
So in the South, that definitely plays a role. But the atmospheric conditions and things are more stable. You have a little more of a safety net with non-target plants being killed. So like if you have crop trees or something, you have a little more of a safety net. Everything's dead and fuel. So there are lots of reasons people try to avoid nesting seasons, especially for turkeys or quail.
Right. Yep.
So, there are a lot of things coming together in the South. I don't know how much it influences you guys in other parts of the nation, but in the South, people don't like burning in the fall because they have to do it on Saturday and it's college football day. There are a lot of people that aren't burning because they want to watch Florida play a ball game.
Yeah.
So, which I understand, I'm part of that atmosphere and I love it, but there are all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
And what the problem with that mindset is, we're steadily eroding away the number of burn days that you have to actually accomplish what you're wanting to. So that dormant season fire is perfectly fine to continue to reset succession. You move forage down back into the reach of deer, and you can manage the structure of the plant community really well to promote foraging or cover for deer or any other species. But I've spent probably the last 8 or 10 years of my career really focusing on how to expand the burn window, because if all those things that we just talked about, if you start whittling away the days, I actually did a literature review on this and started saying, okay, these people don't want to burn during nesting. That's a barrier. These people own hardwoods and they're closed canopy. They literally can't get it to burn between May and August. On most years. Hunting seasons in the fall, most people have a 9 to 5 or whatever, and they can't just burn any day during the week when they get a good day. And if you whittle it all the way down to all these limitations, not going to burn during the hunting season, all that in the South, you get down to about 3 or 4 burn days for most people.
Wow.
that you would get on average a year, where you could actually pull a permit and get a fire on the ground.
Yeah.
Now, if you're paying a contractor to do it, that might open up some, but they're trying to do that for a lot of people.
Sure.
So, they're not necessarily going to be more available than that. Some people can take off of work or in a situation where they don't have to do that, or they have a land manager or whatever. But for the average person, the window gets pretty restricted real quick.
Yep.
So I've been focusing on that a lot. How do we expand the burn window? And is there any reason why you want to?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, Marcus, if I could just kind of expand on Jeremy's question of not only when to burn, and I know that there's a ton of, caveat or nuance or warning label that should be put on, before you go out and burn. So it's not just hey, here's how you do it. But generally speaking, like, what would, and if you're able to, I mean, we're in the Northeast and in the Midwest, a lot of, most deer hunters, I won't exclude the Southeast. It's just the one that I'm personally the least familiar with. I know you've got some experience down there, but generally speaking, what would be the motivator for somebody to want to burn, likely relating to their deer hunting season or wanting to improve that? And are there some general kind of best practices? Like if we want to mention fire breaks, I know that those are one of the biggest things you can implement from a safety standpoint. Tools, I know you mentioned drip torches. And then general technique in terms of whatever it would be, like a back burns, head burn, or wherever you call those. Can you kind of just give us a general practice, why somebody might want to do that, how they might approach it, and then obviously when, we've kind of covered that.
Yeah. So I guess the major reason why most people use fire for deer is to improve habitat. And that happens in two ways that are really important for deer. One is it can increase forage quality of plants in the community and increase the biomass of availability and how much of it is in reach, which plants are available, and it even can influence which ones deer prefer. Like it'll change the actual preference for an individual species depending on the context. So that's a really valuable thing. If you start crunching the numbers on it, it is so much more efficient than the stuff that people just do regularly, like plant food plots or use feeding or whatever. They're not even on the same planet in terms of the efficiency cost-wise. And not only that, you gain all these benefits associated with cover. And that's pretty important. I know you guys had Dr. Kilgo on, I think, several months ago, talking about coyote predation on fawns. Well, one really good way to deal with that situation, and the most consistent way, is to allow the opportunity for fawns to hide better. And there now are some studies indicating that that can be really important. I just published some research to take that even farther, not only from a fawn survival standpoint for predators, decreasing predation. It also, the timing of the fire, not just fire existing, but the timing of it could be critical in populations that are really nutritionally stressed for her to meet the lactation requirements in the plant community,
right?
Because of that resource pulse, and that we were talking about earlier. So there are all kinds. When you're managing habitat with fire or other practices, you're addressing a whole suite of things for the animal all at once. It's cumulative. You're improving survival because the fawn is better hidden. You're improving survival because the female can stay closer to it and still forage efficiently. You're increasing the quality of plants available to them. You're improving the thermal environment for the fawn. We could go on and on and on, and with all these benefits with this, providing high quality structure in the plant community for the animals that you can get from fire.
I think
you don't get it from other practices.
I think logistically too, Marcus, I think a lot of guys come across fire, maybe not even knowing the benefits, but saying, I want to plant a food plot here. How the heck am I supposed to get all this grass or all this thatch, off the ground? Like there's gotta be Mm-hmm. That was my initial approach.
I think one thing that'd be interesting too, kind of to what you were just saying, Marcus, there, and not kind of to piggyback off of what Dr. John Kilgo was talking to us about is, it's kind of this, thought process of, can we saturate, the predator population in an area with, a more concentrated fawning period, right? Because that seems to be.
Which, for the record, if you know John, he didn't leave us with a whole lot of optimism for improving fawn recruitment rates.
Yeah,
he's basically like, no, they're all gonna die. No matter what you do, they're all gonna die.
Yeah. Well, I know John well, and I know his studies well, and he was part of the big effort where we were looking at, the 1,000+ fawn study.
Yep.
His data sets were in that with us. And there are a couple of things. One, when you're trapping, you're trying to address one issue, right? The habitat's addressing a whole suite of issues all the time, including the predation. The trapping is only addressing one, and particularly with coyotes, when we look at all these studies, including John's study, which is one of the best ones ever conducted, we can't actually intensively trap enough at a large enough scale where we actually consistently see more fawns survive.
Right. And I think that was the misconception for a lot of people, is that, if I put effort into removing the predator, right, that is what I'm focused on, whether it's, guys with thermals, which I don't think is efficient, but let's just even say the trapping side. If I put enough steel on the ground that I can get a bunch of coyotes out, I'm going to save fawns. And per the data, that single address is not necessarily the case.
Well, so if you paid a trapper to live on the site who they do that for a living, and they're the best at it.
Yep.
And they do nothing but trap intensively, especially during fawning, and we're doing it at 10,000 acre plus scales, we still don't consistently see an increase in fawn survival when we are tracking them.
Yeah.
We know how many fawns are being born, and we're tracking what happens to them, and we still don't increase it. And that doesn't make sense to people.
Yeah. I mean, it frankly infuriates some people, because they're like, no, that's a lie. Like, I know if I take, these 5 coyotes off my 100 acres, I have more fawns surviving.
Yeah. Well, that also is infuriating to me, because if you want to trap, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Go trap. Please do that.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll make a difference.
Yeah.
I'm just interpreting to you data.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting anything out of it. I don't care if you go kill coyotes or not.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I
mean, I'm still going to shoot
All I'm
them,
telling you is you're
but
putting an enormous amount of effort into that to try to address one thing. And we're consistently showing in the literature with all these huge studies in all these different places is, at best, we inconsistently even address it, and we don't do it very well even when we do.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and there are lots of reasons why that would occur. One, the study that I was involved in North Carolina, which was another one of those situations where all the fawns died. Like, basically, if you're born as a fawn, you're dead. It was really low survival.
Yeah.
And coyotes were certainly a part of that. And there were several things that were interesting about that. We had a bunch of them radio tagged. One of the coyotes we caught, in South North Carolina. This feels weird to say that.
Yep, Southern North Carolina. We got you.
Like northern South Dakota.
Yeah. So we're on the southern border of the state, essentially. And like a month later, that same coyote was up near DC.
Holy cow!
Wait, what?
You actually,
where'd you catch him initially?
Washington, D.C.
Where was he initially?
In southern North Carolina.
So on the border of North Carolina, South Carolina.
If you actually drew a line between all the points, and we're talking about just in a short amount of time, in a couple month period, that coyote walked or ran or whatever, like 900 and something miles.
How far, though? I mean, I know 900 miles like this, but how far point to point from the furthest distance?
It was several hundred miles just as a crow flies.
Wow.
That's nuts.
That's crazy.
And I think that particular one was an adult female. It wasn't like the dispersing young, like we didn't have any pattern with it. We saw a bunch of coyotes do that.
Mm-hmm. And did it ultimately return? Like, did it come?
No.
It just
no, I just
moved on.
Went up there, and I guess it got in some dumpsters or something up there.
Yeah, political campaigns is what it was.
Yeah, it was drawn to the race. He was drawn to the race. He had to be there to show support.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the point is
represent coyotes everywhere.
You know, that might seem shocking to people, but it's actually not that unique. All these coyote studies now, you know, that was one of the first few, but you know, that's common to see these extreme dispersal events, and it's not just the young coyotes. There are a lot of coyotes that are transient, and they're just like moving around the landscape all the time. And as soon as you trap an individual, you know, that dominant female in particular, it seems, as soon as you trap her, she was really good at defending her home range, and then all of a sudden, all these other coyotes try to take over.
Interesting.
All these transients.
So I mean,
that's what it seems like is happening.
Is there almost and I don't want to go down this wormhole necessarily, but is there almost a negative effect there where if you trap the, you know, alpha female out, that you actually could bring more coyotes into the property?
That is certainly one of the potential problems, and I don't know if Kilgo went into it, but if you look at the study where they did several years of trapping in one area, there was one of the years, I think it was the second year, it may have been the third, of intensive trapping. They actually had lower fawn survival in the trapped area than in the non-trapped.
He told us
area.
that.
Yeah, he's like, we can't make any sense of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's since done, you know, a bunch of studies figuring that out, and a lot of the it's not that the coyotes are expanding their reproductive effort and producing more. It is the influx of coyotes from elsewhere.
So
we just can't address that at a large enough scale. And even if we do, it's still
only
addressing one.
Yeah.
It's only one problem. So if we go back to the Fort Bragg study where I did my research, one of the things that was extremely telling to us is we were tracking all these fawns. And when we would go into one that ultimately had died of starvation, they would vocalize. We would hear them vocalizing, like basically if they heard something, they were calling to mama because they were hungry.
Yeah.
Right. It was super sad. But guess what happens when a coyote's running around and he hears a fawn?
Oh yeah.
He's going to go eat it.
Yep.
You know, so even, you know, that's where people will miss the point of why trapping may not always be effective in every circumstance. You know, in this case, you know, the coyote may just be one of the problems. And if you remove the coyotes, then it just increases the importance of the other problem. Like those fawns are going to die either way.
Yeah.
That's completely compensatory mortality.
So
in other words, if the coyote's going to eat it, or if the coyote didn't eat it, it was going to starve anyway.
Yeah.
I wonder, here's a far-fetched plan, but I'm just trying to think of something.
All right.
So like chickens, you know, you build a chicken coop, and they're, you know, pretty safe because they can lay their eggs up into this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could design some kind of a structure or provide does some kind of infrastructure?
You're on drugs.
To have their fawns in a way that they were protected with some kind of human element?
Well, I mean, I was gonna.
There actually is science on this.
Yeah, see,
believe it or not.
Of course, there is.
It's not my science, but I read it and know
in
it well.
In a book.
In a book.
WHIT.
It was a sign. It was a peer-reviewed publication, and it was really well done.
Wow.
It was at the Jones Center in Ecology in South Georgia.
Yep.
And they have these long-term predator exclosures. And they didn't intentionally set them up for does to fawn in, but they have intensively kept them up such that there aren't any basically nest predators or fawn predators inside. And they're large. Mm-hmm. So it's a fence, you know, it's a little bit taller than a chain link fence.
And so they can get in and out, but the predators can't. Is that right?
Deer can jump in and out, but a coyote, they don't get in it.
The coyote can't jump the same fence that a deer can jump?
Well, it's designed such that they can. I see on social media people show a coyote climbing over a fence or whatever, but they don't get in there very often. When they do, it's normally because like the fence was down from a tree or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, they've been able to keep this essentially predator free for all intensive purposes for I don't even know how long, it's been over a decade. But one of the things that they noticed is when they were collaring deer in one of the studies that was led by Mike Cherry,
Yep, I know Mike.
It was during his PhD research. He actually was tracking deer and fawns on the place. And one thing that became fairly obvious is does would go and fawn inside the area. Wow. And they did show that it did increase fawn survival in that case. And it actually, when they did a cost analysis and published it.
Interesting.
And, it was actually more cost effective than trapping.
Wow.
In their case, the way they estimated it.
Well, so I guess
not such a stupid question after all, I guess.
It's like
now
like
most people are not going to accomplish what they're doing.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Marcus. From a landscape level, you're not going to go and build these predator exclosure cages.
How big are they?
Well, and this I don't know how big they are, but they're fairly large. You know, we have deer-proof fences, like those are up all over the place, and coyotes still get in and out of those all the time. So, you know, it's a combination of efforts that they're using in fence design.
Well, and maybe in that particular research, it showed that it increased, you know, fawn survival because the predators can get in. I still wonder, to your point earlier, Marcus, where does the compensatory piece end up coming back?
That's where I think that's where the rubber meets the road. One thing that's happening there is they have they have very high sunlight penetration of the forest.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very low density of trees, and they are burning all the time.
Yep.
And so in other words, food and cover are not limiting in that landscape.
Not an issue. Well, and that's where I think on a landscape level, you know, or guys listening to this and saying, you know, I've got 50 acres, I've got 100 acres, you know, what could you apply? I think that if you were wanting to remove coyotes via trapping or whatever, and in addition, do some serious habitat work and prescribe burning, now those things in balance could lead to an increased survival.
Well, that's actually what hasn't been done really well. We have very few habitat studies where we've actually tracked that kind of stuff, but in a few instances we have it, and I think it plays to what you're saying now. The best that I know of is with quail, but there may be some other species that's been done where the trapping itself is not very effective.
Yep.
The habitat by itself is pretty effective.
Right.
But if you combine the two, then the trapping becomes more effective because all of the other holes in the bucket have been filled, so to speak. So like the trapping by itself is I would love for just solve all the issues, but it just doesn't.
Yeah.
But when it's combined with this more holistic approach to habitat management, which most people can accomplish on their property, regardless of the size, it can be effective in that case, but it still has to be super intensive at a scale that's larger than most people can accomplish anyway.
So like I was involved in one, this is a decade plus ago, at the Smithsonian Research Center in Front Royal, Virginia. And, we were tracking fawn mortality, and then classifying it as, was it a predator? Was it a bear? Or, bear, coyote, et cetera. And that facility was just under 3,000 acres, I think. And we were also high fenced. Now, that said, that high fence had gaps in it, but, it was what it was. The problem that we ended up happening, because we were doing some habitat management on that, but most of it was old growth type forest and kind of untouched, is we were getting a saturation of predators, in particular in that area, black bears, to where our mortality on fawns was through the roof because there were so many black bears in a high concentrated area.
Well, that's actually one of the things I think it's important for people to understand, and it's been demonstrated a lot in several species. One of the other reasons that trapping isn't that effective is because there's a lot of predators, and you're only trapping one of them most of the time.
Yep.
Or maybe a few of them in the case of nest predation, but there's also a bunch of other nest predators or whatever, whichever one you're looking at, and sometimes they just increase in efficiency or eat more of them.
Yep.
They just become more important as a predator.
Yep.
So,
because there's less competition amongst those predators as you're removing their competitors from the equation. So they can go out and do what they want to do.
Yeah. And in some cases, it's been demonstrated that by removing one predator, that predator was suppressing the populations of the other ones like you're talking about. And when we remove them, it allows those to expand, and then they end up being a better predator of the thing you're trying to protect than the ones you were removing.
Crazy.
So, there's all kinds of reasons why there's a lot of gray area, and it isn't as intuitive. And I know we've kind of gone down a wormhole in the trapping thing.
That's all right.
It's something I get I get a fair amount of pushback, I guess, from people about it because they don't like it. And it's like, man, I wish to solve the turkey decline, it meant just everybody start trapping. Yeah. That would be awesome. But
it's not.
It's just not. It's not going to work.
Has there been any research around, it kind of tied to my question earlier about like these exclosures and stuff in terms of like coaxing or influencing those to have their fawns in like a more, it doesn't seem like they're choosing the best locations for survival rates. It almost seems like as humans we're able to kind of,
at least inherently.
I mean, sometimes they're in a road or a middle of an ag field.
Kilgo said he was looking at this, and I don't know if they've gotten very far in it, but looking at basically, are some does better mothers than others? And instinctively, if a let's say like a doe fawn was bred, so she's literally a 1-year-old when she has a fawn. She's probably not necessarily a good mom.
That's not what he said. He said you see doe fawns that are more successful than 6-year-old does.
Well, and I think that's the issue is like what is driving that.
I think there's one. Well, there's a couple of things that I can speak to this based on the data.
These does need to be burning.
They're probably. Well, there definitely are personalities that are different across does, and they're probably doing things differently, and that results in different amount of success.
That's funny to think about does. That one doe I know is a real bitch.
She's crazy.
Yeah.
That girl crazy.
Well, that one, that doe.
Crazy girl.
And you guys know the doe. The doe that always busts you and alerts everybody. Yeah. She's probably the best mama.
Probably. Yeah.
She's the one that is taking it upon herself to make sure nothing is about to happen to my fawn.
Yeah.
She's the one, and that's the one that I want to get out of there because she makes me mad all the time.
Let me interject a question real quick. Let's not lose the track of can you influence them, but I do want to know, because I've even thought it myself. I know a lot of guys think if you shoot that one doe, the blow and doe, I've thought like, man, if I can shoot all these smart does, I'm just gonna have a bunch of stupid deer running around, and some of these bucks are gonna be easier to kill. Have you ever thought that?
Because they don't have anyone to learn.
Yeah,
from.
Who's gonna teach them?
I think they eventually inherently teach themselves, especially as they hit maturity. Yeah, I mean, think of like a 1 or 2-year-old buck.
He doesn't think so.
No, I think genetically, it doesn't matter what population you're in. You're going to end up with this distribution of traits that are heritable, and one of those is probably intelligence.
Yeah.
And you could try to shoot out all the smart ones, but there are going to be some smart ones born anyway.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that's genetic. There's definitely a nurture element to deer.
Oh, absolutely. That said, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a smart button buck in my life. Like, he's the first, even when mom's blowing 40 yards behind him, he's still coming out to the field and just like, I'm hungry.
Yeah. Like, what is all this ruckus about?
Yeah. And so, but I think as you get through, we've all probably seen a mature buck that is just way more visible than others, and it just seems like, he doesn't have a care in the world. And on the same property, there's another one that like is a ghost.
Yeah. Right.
I think a bunch of the buck studies that are ongoing are very telling. The MSU deer study that's going on, they share a lot. I mean, the personality differences between animals is just unbelievable.
Well, same with that coyote you just talked about that went from the South Carolina, North Carolina border to DC. Not all female alpha coyotes are going to do that, yet that one did for some reason.
10 or 15% of them are going to do something wild like that, and they're just travelers for whatever reason. But I think you're right. It's just there are always going to be differences in the population. I think that there's a lot of adaptation that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need the individuals to be doing things differently, because if something really problematic comes along, the population is not going to go extinct over it,
right?
Because there's variation. So to get back to your question about can you influence the choice? One thing that's pretty consistent is that it seems like mothers choose particular kinds of characteristics, at least at a larger scale. Particularly the study that Kilgo was involved with and Will Goolsby led it from Auburn, they showed that more edge resulted in higher fawn survival.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's pretty telling, and among the scientists, we've talked about it a lot with a couple of species, this is certainly the case. When we're tracking these animals and trying to look at, habitat selection for fawning or whatever, it's often in places, and a lot of the landscape is like this, where there aren't very many, or there are maybe no good choices available to them. Mm. So like you could track an individual doe and say, okay, where did she choose? But if everywhere that she had to choose from sucks, you're not going to see a choice for some,
Sure.
So one of the problems that we're having is we need to be integrating the habitat work with those studies to see. And that's been done a couple of times with some species now recently, like with turkeys, where we saw a very clear selection when the right kinds of community was available and structure. And then that had a big impact on the success. Mm. Let's take that a step further. One of the studies that I was author to from Fort Bragg, one of the problems that we had in that landscape is it's super poor, and all of the really good places to fawn in the landscape were in these little narrow strips along drainages. So that looked from the doe's perspective like a really good place to fawn. So she'd go put her fawns in it. And then we actually demonstrated with an analysis that the does who chose to put their fawns in that area had a much higher probability of predation. They were choosing the best thing available, and they had a particular set of conditions they were looking for. But because of the way that was arranged on the landscape, it made it a big problem.
Well, and I don't want me to play God with this question, but like it almost seems like we're able to know better, like, because we're aware, I think, of how coyotes. That's why I'm saying, like, man, if we could coax them to, have their fawns here.
Well, I will say we're the ones that created that trap for them.
Yeah,
and it's done pretty commonly. Like, we have these linear strips of really high quality cover that's like on a roadside or something, and we're creating a problem because the animal is looking for that cue, and it just happens to be the only place there is that it occurs.
Yeah.
What we can do is then change the distribution of this high quality cover, into bigger blocks and irregular shapes that aren't easy to hunt. And then, go find a fawn in some really high quality fawning cover, especially when there's a sea of it. Good luck.
Yeah.
Well, see, I don't know for sure, but like I think that my parents' farm is pretty good fawning cover. It's a lot of it's old pasture, so I've got a few hundred acres of like, I'll bet right now it's like this. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a deal or not, it's a sea of cool season grasses.
Yeah, what seems like cover.
And we still find them like in yards and on roads and stuff. Yeah, we'll find them from time to time and buried in that stuff. It's like, man, I don't. Mm-hmm. What are the chances of me walking across that thing? But I have found them in some pretty undesirable areas, in my opinion.
Well, that certainly occurs. Like, I'm not saying that there aren't some does that put them in poor places. In fact, the study that I was just referring to, there were plenty of does that were putting them in the middle of wide open areas in the upland.
Yeah.
And in that particular landscape, they actually fared better than the ones that went to the higher quality cover.
Yeah.
It went against what should have happened, and it was because of the landscape context. Another thing that people fail to realize is it's not like you're not providing cover independent of other things that are needed. Like the female has that's the maximum nutritional demand on the individual.
Sure.
So she needs a very high quality diet. She also tends to have a very small home range associated with the fawn.
Yep.
So if the cover is something that is undesirable to eat, then you may see that rank, the food may end up ranking over the cover in that case, and you might end up in a weird place.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to look at too, and I know, Mississippi State was looking at this and continues is kind of like this hierarchical structure. Is there a hierarchical structure that it, exists in a doe family group population to where,
has to be, right?
The matriarch essentially takes first choice, and then it kind of divvies itself down from there because, just like, some of these bucks during the rut, like, that female wants a certain amount of space around her when she's fawning and doesn't want other does and other deer in that area. So natural displacement happening there to where, eventually there's just not enough good habitat.
We've seen it in bucks for sure. I mean,
100%.
you've probably seen a buck bedded from a tree stand and watch a bigger, more mature buck come in and just kick them out of the way and say, that's for. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see that all the time.
That is absolutely an important aspect, especially when you start getting into higher density populations or you start restricting the really high quality resources. That is definitely something we don't consider enough, as they are, the dominant individuals are, maybe dominating a resource. We see that on feeders, right?
Yeah.
That has been very clearly shown that resource is really high quality and concentrated in such a small area that, in some cases, only a few individuals take advantage of it. And they aren't necessarily the ones that you want to take advantage of it even.
Yeah.
So, we know that there definitely are social influences going on, and it's so complex. The best thing that you could do is just provide a whole bunch of really good resources, right? Like if you have a lot of awesome fawning cover that also happens to be heavy and a bunch of really good forbs to eat, or it's right next to a really high quality resource or whatever, the more you can create that kind of situation, then let them, we need to trust them that they're going to choose. If you give them the choice, they're going to choose the best stuff. I mean, they're just choosing the best that's available to them under the circumstances. So,
Marcus, I know we're kind of talking, full, let's call it deer population, predation, fawning, et cetera, and the habitat. One of the things that goes back to the three of us and kind of why we do habitat management is because ultimately we want to see more game. We want to, be able to hunt it better. There's a lot of thought processes out there right now from, let's say, more industry people than scientific community that talks about if I enhance that habitat so much in the summertime for fawning and for does and doe family groups, that as I get closer into the season, that maybe, let's call it some of those bigger mature bucks don't want to coexist in that same space. Essentially, I flood my population or my property with so many does and fawns and things like that, it doesn't make it a, quote, good buck property.
But you're talking about Sturgis. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's not shy about the fact that he's like dead set against any summer management projects, at least in his part of the country, and a lot of the
upper Midwest
places that he's doing consulting on for that reason. He's like, I don't want to draw more does to this property because it's gonna influence it negatively, the mature buck sightings. Right? Is that about what he's saying?
That is the theory.
At least in terms of effort put into management, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Craig would be pretty blunt about this one, Marcus. So,
yeah. Well, you can interpret my silence that way. I have not seen any data that suggests that is a reasonable way to go.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's just not out there. The behavioral data, we don't see them avoid each other. There is some sexual segregation,
sure,
and it is spatial and temporal, but it is, one of the studies that I did that I think would speak to this is we were actually baiting cameras. So just like, having a feeder there, and we would have, I looked at whether or not bucks and does were spatially segregating that resource or temporally.
Yep.
And it was actually really interesting. It was spatiotemporal. So in other words, like there were feeders or locations, so you can just think of it as a foraging patch. There were locations where one of the sexes would use it more in the day and the other one at night.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might go couple hundred yards down the way, and that was reverse. They would both be foraging at the same times, but they were doing it in different space. Right. So, but it wasn't like they didn't ever use that particular space, and it wasn't at a very large spatial scale that they were segregating. So it wasn't like if my property has all the day use does, then I'm not going to have any bucks using it during the day. That's not the way it works.
Really? So there's no evidence to show like, I don't know what you call it, so like social pressures to where like mature bucks are avoiding heavy, doe group areas.
Well, that would be part of the spatial and temporal use, in that, like, if there's a big group of family, let's say does and fawns in a food plot, right? That buck may not use it at the same time, but
it still uses the plot. It just doesn't use it at the same time.
Correct.
Well, so expand the area then and just talk about a piece of property,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have both. They're both going to be on there.
They may not be in the same exact place at the same time, but they're both using the same places just at different times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard it discussed as pretty common knowledge that, like, if you have too many does in an area, a mature buck.
I've actually not heard that.
Really?
So from the science side, and again, the reason when Jeff brought that up to me,
I've heard that even from like.
It's completely against everything that, I learned when I was in school through, my bachelor's, my master's, and then even research after that, in that.
Well, isn't that true? You'd say generally speaking, like a mature buck wants to be secluded. He doesn't want to be
secluded in time, not necessarily in space. So think about this. So think about that. Yeah, exactly. So think about your property, right?
Yeah.
If you go up in
about time and space.
Yeah. So, like, I don't know, pick any part of your property, like the Roberts, right? That may be loaded with does and fawns in the evening feeding in those fields, right? As night sets and those deer end up moving back into the woods or moving out of that area, now that mature buck comes in and feeds in that area. So he's using the same space just at a different time.
That's not what I've observed on my farm.
Well, yeah, but your farm, they just leave.
Well, no, even during the summer, so like I'd say a set period, let's say August.
Yep.
Typically, I will see fields full of does.
Yep. And fields full of bucks.
I'll see 6 fields full of does for every one bachelor group that I see in a field by themselves.
Which makes sense. But it's the same property, same space.
And I perceive that as they don't want to be near those does. I could be wrong.
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time.
Correct. That's what Marcus is saying, is that they coexist on the same property.
I mean, do you have camera locations where you only get one sex on it?
Yes, for sure.
You never get bucks on it.
Yeah, mainly during the summer. Yeah, 100%.
That's interesting.
I've had camera locations that for an entire summer, there are no bucks. It's only does.
And see, this is where I wonder, like, so his farm in Ohio, Marcus, is pretty, I would call it fragmented. It's old pasture. So it's small woodlots.
Mm-hmm.
This is Ohio, eastern and central Ohio.
Big ag.
About 1,000 acres.
Yep, big ag, and then small woodlots and some old pasture. And so I think you see some of that segregation or use in certain areas because, like, it is so fragmented that, they're not necessarily moving through there.
After several years of observing that, it seems fairly clear that those bucks they move such a limited amount, and they don't seem to want to be with those does in the summer.
Yep.
Yeah, so they're just in this one spot. And so if I put a camera there, I'm just going to get pictures of those bucks.
And we know that most of those bucks in the summertime are moving, from a core area of 40 acres?
Nothing. Yeah, they'll bed in a little triangle.
Well, I think there's a few things to think about here. One, the nutritional demands of the sexes might be quite different, especially at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing is they tend to have this restricted range. So if they're anchored to different resources, that could just as easily explain the same phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I also have, I don't know how many thousands, but it's a lot of cameras all over the South, and it is very uncommon that we have one that would be completely segregated to one sex.
Really?
And see, that's where I would say that, Jeff might not be wrong in like the upper Midwest side, but if you had a single desirable food source, like just a single bean field or a single feeder in an area,
they're all going to be there.
They're at different times. I don't think you'll see mature bucks and does there at the same time.
Depending on density,
that's been demonstrated a bunch of times, and I've been involved in several of the studies. The activity pattern of use of that particular feeder or food plot or whatever will differ generally.
Yep.
Like we'll see, they're both using it, but they don't use it at exactly the same time. There will be some overlap, but there is segregation in time of the use of that resource.
Whereas on your place, you've got enough food in the summer and even in the fall to where like this doe group could just use this soybean or this brassica plot, and the buck could use this one, and it's essentially the same thing, and they don't have to overlap.
Well, there's a ton of ag, so there's more than enough food for all of your...
Right. And in that circumstance, they are trying to segregate their time. And if they can do that in space as well, then sure, they could be doing that.
Freaking time traveling deer up in here.
It's like quantum leap.
They're moving backwards in space.
I find that when you add the one dimension, the one extra dimension, it seems to be really hard to think about for whatever reason. But that's something that it's been really interesting for me because I grew up in a hunting camp with a bunch of Southern guys that had all these theories about all the way everything worked, and then I just kind of went a step further and was like, well, is that really how this works? And
find out 90% of it's wrong.
As a scientist, I'm thinking, well, are we actually isolating one variable here?
Yeah.
Because when you start telling me that, I'm not saying at all that you aren't observing that. I'm trying to figure out, well, what are the potential reasons that you might observe that? And that, I think that's a key difference in the way that a scientist looks at it generally compared to a hunter.
Yep.
I just happen to be both.
And they are very different. Would you agree they're very different mindsets? Like as a hunter and not as a biologist, I prefer I don't know, we call it a realist approach or something. Like for me, it makes me a more efficient hunter to realize that each individual, especially mature bucks, are different animals. And it doesn't matter, generally speaking, bucks are moving or this is happening or they're rutting. Those things may be happening, but literally what has to happen is for one animal, for you to be able to predict what it's going to do in a specific location at a specific time and space.
Whereas science is very based on sample size.
Yeah, and
I need a bunch to figure out what they would do as a whole on average.
Yeah, and while it's valuable data, it's valuable data.
Transitioning a lot. That perspective is transitioning to looking at it at the individual level. Now we have the technology to track individuals. I mean, a lot of the emerging stuff on deer is actually trying to figure out individual variation and even go a step further. Now we're trying to figure out what is driving the individual variation.
Yeah.
So, I think the key thing that, from the people that I hunt with and grew up with and everything, the key difference from me, the way I think about it versus the way that they are, is they kind of just make up their mind that it's this thing. This is causing what they're observing.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
it's the moon. It's the moon. It's too many does. It's too many coyotes.
Yeah. Like we've just, you've just made the determination that this is the thing that's driving what I've observed this time or all the time or whatever. And then I'm always skeptical. I was like, wait a minute.
Me too.
There's way more. There are lots of competing hypotheses here that could drive the same observation.
Well,
so
that's why I really dislike things. Not to bash any of them specifically, but like Deercast. I know this is one that's really widely used. But any app that's like good time to hunt 97%. It's like what?
Well, yeah, and it's just the patterns and prediction things has always been something that the community has tried to latch onto, whether it was the moon phase.
Well, that's because we want an easy answer.
Yeah, we would just want an answer, period. Yeah. Right? And sometimes the answer is it depends or it varies. And that's just the honest truth in that, and
that's 100% the answer in the case of deer hunting.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's it.
Well, just to, for me, this idea with, that we're going around with the spatiotemporal
time and space
segregation and all that. I've also seen a whole bunch of individuals collared of both sexes in the same place. And if you overlap their home ranges, they overlap a lot.
Yeah.
Like they're using the same space. But then when you go into more detail, you realize that they're using it at different times.
Yeah.
And that is very common in studies.
And I think,
there's some segregation, but it's more in time than space often.
And I think we, with the obviously cell cameras and things like that, we are getting better observational data than just sitting in the tree stand during a limited amount of hours. Yeah. But even with cell cameras, those who use them long enough know, listen, you're missing a ton of movement and observation just because that camera has a limited range of detection. And so to truly understand these home range overlaps in time and space use, you have to rely on the research because that's the only place that somebody's going to be getting a reading on a GPS collar every 8 minutes of that deer during the day. Yeah. Other than that, you can't see it.
Yeah. I've had some studies where we had a camera in every 2 acres for the whole property. And we're running them year round all the time. And, when you look at it at that scale, it starts to change the way that you look at what's going on. So there probably are individual spots, and maybe that's some sort of food plot or something in a small space where you tend to only get one and not the other. But those same individuals are overlapping in their use of space somewhere else. So it's another thing that's going on that you're not necessarily seeing. You're only seeing when they're in the field feeding, not seeing where they're at when they're bedding or whatever. So it's we always want to make it simple, and it's just not.
Yeah.
There's too much stuff going on. There's all this individual variation. It's so complex. And if it wasn't so complex, I guess I wouldn't have a job.
What's your monthly cell cam bill?
Yeah, it's extreme.
I don't. Yeah,
off.
It's pretty nuts.
It's a write off.
University pays for it.
Well, that's not true actually. most of my work is I have some like federal and state agency funds, but also had a lot of private donations that are supporting a lot of the work. So. But we probably have 1,000 cameras running right now at this moment.
Wow.
Mainly like regular cameras that you go out and check, or cell cameras?
We both. It depends on the study and where the funding's coming from.
What kind of cameras do you use?
We have a few kinds that we are using. The one that I probably have. I probably have like 500 to 700 of the trophy cams.
Just Bushnell trophy cams?
Yeah, trophy cam HD. Yep. And that's mainly because it's a cost per benefit thing and where the funding's coming from.
Yep, that makes sense.
So, and then it's good for me to standardize. So,
sure.
But there's a lot of great cameras out there. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Stealth Cam.
Dude, where would we be without our cell cams?
I would definitely be divorced at this point.
Yeah, I hear that.
I mean, the fact is I spent more time checking cameras than I actually did hunting prior to cell cameras. Now, at least, my wife can enjoy me being in the comfort of my own home, buried in my phone, checking those pictures.
Yeah, 100%. And dude, when it comes to trail cameras and definitely cell cameras, reliability is, I think, the number one thing that we're looking for. Stealth Cam just has a long reputation of reliable cameras, and ultimately that is the most important thing to us. They have to work.
In terms of reliability, there's not a better camera on the market than Stealth Cam, whether you're talking about the Fusion X, the Reactor, or the DS4K Transmit. And most of them are under $200.
Stealthcam.com. Check them out.
Someone will listen to this and say, all right, I don't care, Marcus, if you have 1,000 cameras out there, you're wrong. Like, that buck will never use that same area as that doe.
I'm probably, people haven't even heard this yet, and they're already emailing me, DMing me that I'm wrong about something. So that's fine. And you know what? The truth of the matter is I am wrong. And so is everybody else.
We are. Yep.
What is it? A broken clock's right twice a day.
That's it. That's exactly.
It's the same thing. There's so many things going on, and you're probably right and wrong in different contexts all the time.
Yeah.
Because there's so much going on.
Yeah.
And it's just, we want it to be simple, and it's just not.
Yeah.
Well, it's great for us. It gives us a lot to kind of consider as we're applying different management projects and stuff. And we're kind of like, well,
yeah,
we've heard this and we think this, and
it
makes it fun
it's
for
trial
us.
and error. You try something and maybe it works great. Like I might plant summer plots in Ohio this year, and I have a bunch of bucks there in the summer, and then they disappear in the fall, and it's like, well, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
And then change it up in the next year.
Yeah, and there may be nothing you can do about it.
Exactly. Yeah, those deer just truly may pick up and move in the summer, which I think is the case for your farm. We've it's a hard conclusion to come to because we don't want it to be that way, but sure as hell seems like at the end of September, those deer just go away.
Yeah, in some cases.
Well, what do you think is driving it?
Cover, lack of cover.
Yeah.
I would, not knowing anything else, that would have been my guess.
Yeah.
Which is why we talked with Craig about old field management, because he's got a ton of old pasture ground that is doing nothing that we could.
It could be awesome cover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just let it go, Jared.
Just let it grow.
He is the best there is on
I think the plan
management.
I think the plan.
That's what I know. You can't argue with him on it. You bring up switchgrass and he's like, why would you spend all that money on switchgrass when you can just let it go?
I think the plan as of right now is I'm gonna either myself or I'll have my dad just brush hog some areas that I want to end up.
Ooh. Now Craig just cringed and he wasn't even here.
Well, I'm gonna brush hog it in preparation for burning. Okay, all
right, we're good.
Or spraying first, I guess. So like I would cut it once or twice. I don't know, July and
couldn't you just nuke it and burn it?
Yeah, and then I'll nuke it. I think he said like mid-October.
It depends on what are you trying to kill.
It's fescue.
Grass?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, you want it to be growing well, and
I want this. It's cool season grass is all it is now. So by the time November comes around, it's just laying flat. I would like for that to be some kind of standing structure, thicket. I don't care, just something that they'll bed in.
Yeah, which I think there's enough in that seed bed that would come through if you get rid of that grass. That would,
I don't know if you guys talked to him about that, but one of the recent studies that Craig just published on old field, renovation basically on fescue pasture into old field communities, that's what they showed us in all these different states and contexts on all these sites. They didn't have to plant anything.
Yeah.
It was just about getting rid of the grass and disturbing the soil and letting the native stuff respond.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? That's probably what I'm going to do. I'll cut twice.
I don't even know if you would have to burn it. If you would chemically kill it and just
maybe not
turn it.
If I was going to burn it, it would be in like February.
Yep.
So like I would cut, spray in October, maybe 2-3 weeks after that or whenever. I'd go in and put fire breaks in the fall.
So you can burn.
And then in February, March, I'd burn off what I have my breaks around and then let it go.
Yeah, let it go. Or
I had plant clover when I disc too.
Or till it.
In the breaks.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll work. The disking works fine too.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
The disking, you may get a different suite of forbs.
Sure. Just by bringing them back up. Yeah.
Well, so I'm just disking the breaks.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Instead of burning, you could disc.
Yeah, there are a lot of landowners that for whatever reason they don't want to use fire or camp.
Yep, they'll disc.
And they use disking, and in some cases you may want them to be together.
Mm-hmm.
Like not doing both of them in the same time, but doing them in the same space.
What if I
space and time back over again?
What if I didn't burn? Like what if I just cut it in preparation and then sprayed it in October and then that's it?
Then I think you would still want to.
I think that's what Craig said to do.
Yeah, you don't want the thatch there, so you're dealing with the thatch with the burning or disking.
It'll get absorbed by the soil.
I would disc it. I'd turn it over. Just to get that seed bed, one or the other. You don't need to do both.
So, if there's a lot of thatch there, the burning might be a more effective way to get rid of all.
I think it's a burn.
There you go.
So,
And you could disc it.
Right now it's cheaper.
Well, it's a lot of acreage. I mean, I could do.
But we're talking 10, 15 acre chunks here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could do 100 or 200 acres of this stuff.
It's a lot of bedding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not obviously all at once, but I mean, if I could do a 25 acre chunk,
you'd want to stagger it too, so you had varying levels of succession, and then at some point you would come back and run a fire through an area, but you wouldn't want to burn all of it at the same time.
The main thing that's constantly getting ahead of me, and it's always like, because April, May, I'll be like, oh, management projects, man, and I haven't done the prep work, the year before, so I'm always a year behind with this stuff. So like, this is the year that I really want to use the fall time to prepare for a burn early, next year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even if you get 25 acres done this year, that's huge. It's huge. Huge.
Well, and the more of it you get converted, then you get it staggered so that you always have, that really high quality, the peak quality of bedding cover is always available. It's just changing where it's at because every year you do a part of it.
Dude, if I could get my dad into like a good cycle of burning, like we'd be in good shape. He has the time. That's what I don't have.
Yeah.
In that kind of situation, especially if when there's openings like that and you can use green fire breaks with food plots or ag or whatever, that is a really good way to get a lot of burning done and safely. You can set it up where it's safe for you to go to town on it. Get it done. So, and it can provide a huge benefit, and not just to deer. I know you guys are fanatical about deer, but like I like turkeys a lot, and you want to make a place for a turkey to play. That is a great one, and it's one that's nearly missing from the landscape, especially for poult rearing.
Cool. Yep.
That old field community is absolutely critical.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I like very rare now.
Yeah. Well, dude, and frankly, that's the thing that should have been the very first thing I did on this piece of property. We've had it for 6 or 8 years, and I've spent a lot of time doing.
You added a lot of food.
TSI.
You did TSI.
Had a lot of food I probably didn't need.
Now you just have a bunch of cool season pasture that you're not grazing.
It's wasted acreage.
Yeah, it's wasted acreage.
Well, I think you said something that is really important, and I see it pretty commonly, and I've succumbed to this line of thought myself several times. We always think about food. Well, if you're already providing all the food they could ever want, then what is providing more food going to do?
Right.
Like focus on what is limiting. And when you really hold deer is when you're the only game in town for one of the resources like cover in your part of the world.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, and that's where like our farms differ in Ohio. Yours, I think, lacks cover but has food. Mine has cover, but I lack food. And so those are the things that we're both trying to work on to make those better places.
Agreed.
And that's where
ideally you provide all of them at the same time. But if you have the limiting resource and you're the only game in town, you're going to have them.
Yep, for sure. Well, cool, Marcus. Well, we appreciate you coming on the HUNTR Podcast, man. Thanks for dropping some fire knowledge on us and some deep South knowledge, too. We don't get to pull in the Southerners very often on this thing, so it's nice to be able to hear kind of a whole different world down there and be able to expose the audience to it. I guess last thing before we go, obviously, Dr. Disturbance on Instagram. To get you. What else from your Deer Lab side? Do you guys have a Florida Deer Lab research website page and stuff for articles and things going on?
We have not embarked on the website yet.
Okay.
Because we're getting traction through other things and have focused our efforts. So I have a podcast network. Deer University is one of the podcasts in it, and I host Fire University. So I talk about all this, and of course I'm relating it to game species all the time and talking to experts about it from all over the place. But then, Dr. Disturbance on Instagram and Twitter is where I put out a lot of information directly about research when it's coming available and that sort of stuff. And then we have the UF Deer Lab on a variety of social media and YouTube and all that. So
cool.
Best way to, I guess it's getting to the point where the best way to get a hold of me is to DM me through Instagram. It's even better than email now.
Yeah, so exactly.
If people have questions or want to, tell me I'm wrong or whatever, feel free to send that through DM. I'm accustomed to getting told I'm wrong
Yeah, as are
daily,
we.
pretty much.
Hey, last question, because I forgot to say it. When are you doing your bow stand burns? I know you kind of coined that term in this space,
the
which
bow
is
range burning.
Yeah, there you go. When are you doing that?
Yeah, that actually. So we have this magnet effect on deer that they're responding to it, and a whole suite of other species. But that generally is about 6 or 8 weeks after the fire.
Okay.
So the original study, which is now peer reviewed and published, and I can provide that to people if they want to see it. That study, we did the burning in September and then monitored the response of deer in October, which it was in Mississippi, and that's bow season.
Okay.
So,
then,
it
you
was
are
a 30-yard radius
leading up to the season, right? I mean,
right before it. And that's one of, we kind of got.
Well, and that's what I guess I'm asking that, because I think it'd be well worth maybe having you back in like July or August if you're up for it, to like let's talk about that kind of, we can play with other stuff too, but let's try to hone in on some of that stuff. I think it'd be really interesting to people, especially anyone who hasn't burned yet. As long as you can do it safely, a small controlled bow range burn is probably something they want to attempt prior to going and lighting 50 acres up.
Well, we ended up going down a different rabbit hole, so we didn't get into that kind of stuff. But that was one of the reasons because I'm a bow hunter and I wanted to see if deer would respond at that scale. But the other thing is, a lot of people are afraid to burn if they haven't been doing it. They need to get the training and all that stuff that's available to you wherever you're at. And then you don't have to burn enormous acreage to have an impact. You plant a half-acre food plot. Well, hell, go out and burn a half an acre.
Yep.
So, most people at that scale, it's not that they're not afraid of it anymore, and they can, learn a lot about the practice and get more comfortable. A lot of people with that one in particular, it really took off whenever we launched that. And I still get emailed all the time like, hey, I started out burning around some bow stands, and now look, I just burned this 20-acre patch, and, it's been overwhelming, which is the reason I'm doing all of this is the reason we have all those accounts and everything. I'm trying to do research that impacts people's land management and ultimately the resource. And, part of that is getting it to people, and part of it is delivering it in a way that shows you can do it. Awesome, you can accomplish it, trying to decrease all those barriers. So that was a fall burning, and it was just trying to take advantage of the intense attraction right after it. And the scale was really.
Let's kind of join back up later this summer and make a good attempt to stick on topic around that. I think that'd be a really good one.
Fantastic. By then, I will have cut some of these areas kind of so we can kind of keep up with that project too.
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'd be more than happy to do it. And I'm working with a bunch of other people on different timing and different contexts, so we could talk about all that and why you might want to burn in the fall.
Awesome.
Sounds good, man. Well, Marcus, we appreciate you coming on, and thanks for your time this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things there. I know, obviously, Marcus is really kind of taken, and we've talked about the fire thing a lot, and frankly, it's just not something that's used a lot in our world and underused, in our Northeast and Midwest area. And so, I mean, you hear people talking about burning switchgrass and stuff, but I mean, a prescribed burn, like I've been planning on doing one on some of my places for a while, because I've got, years of leaf accumulation and fuel load on the ground. And even if I cut down trees and open up, canopy, the sunlight is still hitting a thatch layer of, in my case, it's leaves. In your case, it might be cool season grasses or whatever.
Yeah.
And so in order for that seed bed to be activated, you've got to clear that layer off.
The seed bed, Jeremy. The seed bed.
In order for that seed bed to be activated, you have to burn. Why would you do anything else? And so you got to clear that off. And so it's but that said, I've done it. I know you have too. And especially if you don't burn often or have the parameters set up to control that burn, when a fire gets going, it isn't easy to stop. In fact, I was burning a lot of debris out of that new food plot behind my house, and I had like 7 or 8 piles going, and it wasn't windy, but there was a little bit of wind. next thing you know, I couldn't see anything. It was so smoky. I'm trying to figure out, like, is this spreading up here? Is this going too far this way? Like,
yeah, it doesn't take much,
then I've got 7 fires I'm trying to control myself with a blower and a rake. And it's like, that thing gets out of hand really quick if you take your eye out of it.
Yeah, you really got to, take the time to make the preparations. Those fire breaks are so critical, and they have to be big. I don't know what the rule of thumb is, but like at least 10 feet.
I know, and a lot of people will do a single pass with a disc or a tiller. It'll jump that easily. Yep.
Yeah, well, think about a 4 or 5 foot flame, which is very doable, laying over.
Lays over, yep. That's it.
That's all it takes, man.
So, yeah, it's a tough thing for, I think, people to grasp. But, it's such a powerful – it is the original wildlife management tool is fire, you know. And I think that as you start to look at your property, especially when it comes to cover and stuff, we can cut in open canopies. You can, if you like hinge cutting, great, do hinge cutting. Ultimately, that layer on the ground has to be burned off for that seed bed to be reactivated and, new early successional growth come up. And that's what's critical to all of the wildlife that we care about, whether it's turkey, deer, grouse, pheasant, quail, doesn't matter. All of it is super critical to have early successional habitat. None of those wildlife species need old growth forest. They don't. So, it's a major tool in the toolbox, and it'll be interesting to get Marcus back on in July or August to talk about those bow range burns, because I think that's a great place to start. Because frankly, you could probably I'm looking at even like a 1/4 acre, and I've got one of those like lithium battery blowers that I will essentially, push a ring of that, thatch and stuff in, and that will be my break. And again, at a 1/4 acre with one fire, it's much easier to contain, especially if you're talking about hardwood areas or pine areas where it's leaf litter and things like that. It's not going to be burning 5-foot switchgrass and, a major blaze. It's going to be a slow rolling fire. In fact, most of the time you're going to end up hitting it multiple times with either that blower or another drip torch on it, just because it'll stall out. It's not going to burn hot. It's not going to burn fast. And I think that's an important thing to look at, and try one, try an area and see what it looks like and how that responds. And, it's harder than it sounds just because of the way that our landscape sets up with, houses and neighbors and everything else. But just take your time, try it out. And then like Marcus was saying, now guys are comfortable doing 10 or 15 acres and they don't care. So, but cool information there. Nice to tie that back into Dr. John Kilgo as well when we start talking about that predation and understanding like you can have an effect if you do habitat and removal. Like that's you can't just do one or the other necessarily, and you can't just kill them all and think you're going to remove them all, because that's not going to happen.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's good information as you're thinking about, moving here in the late spring into early summer, and, it's on the horizon. Season's on the horizon at this point. Now it's like, how do I prep to make sure that during the season, my efforts are really in full swing.
That's it, man. Dude, by the time the next podcast rolls around, I'll have Pretty Boys shed back from Antlers by Klaus.
Very cool.
So I'll bring it in here, and they took a while to get it, but I understand they had a labor shortage just like everybody else.
I would assume within the next 2 to 3 weeks we will know if we drew for Kansas.
I've started to get something back. I got my Utah elk and deer point, and
yep, we bought our Iowa point, number 4.
Yeah, we bought them both, right?
Yep. Number 4.
Got that.
Kansas should be a draw. We actually drew for North Dakota again, 3 years in a row. Sometimes you just got the luck.
Lucky guy.
But we deferred. We're not gonna take that trip.
Yeah. So for anybody that doesn't know, you can get a refund. They won't give you a preference.
There
point,
are no preference points necessarily if you get drawn.
Back.
Yep. So we got our money back. But yeah, we got hunts coming up. That's why I'm kind of thinking about, I got to get those beans. I want to have a really strong early season opportunity in Kentucky, because you'll be hunting in Colorado with your dad for elk. I'll be trying to kill a velvet buck in Kentucky is the plan.
Yeah, and you'll have that done before. I'm not leaving. Our hunt's like September 23rd.
Oh, yeah, I'll be done before then.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
So I may, to be honest, I may not even be back before the opener in Ohio. I don't know. Maybe like right around there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, we appreciate everyone listening to episode 75 of the HUNTR Podcast with Dr. Marcus Lashley from the University of Florida Deer Lab.
Listen, Ashley, that's a girl's name.
But I know, well, because that's where I met Marcus is when he was working under Craig for his master's degree, because he was getting his master's at the same time I was getting mine, and yeah, it's funny because like at that time, like obviously we all work together and we talk, but like you got the Tennessee squad and you got the Mississippi State squad and you got the Texas squad and then you got who else was in that? That's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Georgia. Georgia. No Canadians. I know Canadians in that squad. So, and that's your kind of groupings and stuff. And then like you hear a Marcus, like you went to Mississippi State, then Tennessee, then NC State, then back to Mississippi State, now to Florida. Like you end up blending through in all these places, which is kind of the cool thing. So I think we're, as long as it's in person, I think I'm planning on attending the Southeast Deer Study Group next year. I think it's in Louisiana. So I think I'm going to go down and try to engage with some people down there. It'd be a good way to figure out what people were doing research on and bring them back to the podcast at some point.
Cool.
So, all right. Well, we'll catch you all next week.
Later.
Take me